I sit down to write to you from the tower I built with my own hands in Bollingen, by the shores of Lake Zurich. Here, where the water reflects the mountains and the wind carries the scent of ancient earth, I have spent the deepest years of my life. It was not an easy path. There were nights when the fire went out and the darkness seemed to swallow everything. But it was in that darkness that I found what I now wish to share with you. Let me tell you a story. It is not just any story. It is the story of a man I will call Thomas. Thomas came to me when he had already lost count of how many times his life had broken apart. He was a successful man, the kind the world admires. He had a business that thrived, a wife who smiled in photographs, children who attended the best schools. But when he sat in the silence of his study, something inside him trembled. Something he could not name. Thomas had been unfaithful. Not once. Many times. Whenever routine became heavy, whenever success felt empty, whenever his wife's gaze ceased to be the mirror in which he wanted to see himself, he sought another woman, and with her, for a few weeks, he would feel alive again. But the life never lasted. Guilt would arrive. The secret would weigh on him, and Thomas would return home with his head bowed, promising not to repeat it, until the next crisis came and the cycle began anew. "I don't understand why I do it," he told me one afternoon, his hands buried in his face. "I love my wife. I love my children. My life is good. Why do I destroy it again and again?" I looked at him, and in his question, I heard the question of so many men who have come to my consulting room over the years. Men who have confused desire with love, need with passion, escape with freedom. And I knew the answer was not in what Thomas did, but in what Thomas had stopped seeing. "Tell me about your father," I said. Thomas lifted his head in surprise. He did not understand what his father could have to do with his infidelities, but he agreed. And then he began to unspool a story he himself had forgotten. His father was a serious man, the kind who measures words as if each one cost money. He had never told him "I love you." He had never hugged him without reason. He had never attended a school play or a soccer game, but he had not left either. He was there, in the same house, at the same table, in the same silence. And Thomas, like so many sons, had spent his childhood trying to earn his gaze. "I got good grades," he told me. "I helped around the house. I never caused trouble." But he remained in his own world. Sometimes when I achieved something important, he would lift his eyes and look at me for a second. And that second, for me, was everything. "And now," I asked, "who looks at you?" Thomas fell silent. And in that silence, I knew I had touched the center of his wound. Because what Thomas sought in every woman was not sex. It was a gaze that would tell him he existed, that he mattered, that he was enough, the gaze his father had never given him. And because he could not obtain that gaze from the one who truly needed to give it, he had sought it in other bodies, other faces, other stories. What I tell you is not an isolated case. It is the manifestation of something I have seen again and again in my work with the human soul. Something I call the shadow. The shadow is not an abstract concept. It is everything we have decided not to be. Everything we have repressed, denied, hidden. Not because it is evil, but because it did not fit the image we wanted to construct of ourselves. Thomas, as a child, learned that being good meant not being a bother, that being loved meant being invisible, that being accepted meant not asking. And so he buried in his shadow everything that did not fit that mold. His need to be seen, his desire to be held, his rage at not being enough, his fear of not existing. And the shadow, believe me, does not disappear when we ignore it. It grows, and when it grows enough, it demands to be seen. And then, without our knowledge, we begin to project it onto others. Thomas projected his shadow onto women. Each new woman was, without his knowing it, a screen upon which his soul displayed everything he had repressed. The passion he did not allow himself, the spontaneity he had tamed, the need to be seen that had never healed. And that is why, whenever a woman looked at him with desire, he felt reborn. But it was a false rebirth. because it was not she who looked at him. It was his own shadow returning his gaze from another's face. The problem, and this is what Thomas was slow to understand, is that projections always break. Because the real woman, with her own shadows, her own wounds, her own life, cannot bear the weight of what Thomas asked of her. He did not want a woman, he wanted salvation. And no woman can save anyone. That work, that descent, that integration can only be done by each one with himself. Thomas had to learn to descend into the basement of his own soul. And that, I confess, is not a journey made with the mind. It is made with the body, with the heart, with dreams, with tears. He had to ask himself again and again what he was truly seeking. And he had to face the most uncomfortable answer, that he was not seeking love. He was seeking the gaze of a father who would never return, and that as long as he did not learn to give himself that gaze, no woman could give it to him. The shadow, as I have taught, is not eliminated, it is integrated. Thomas had to learn to sit with his need to be seen, not to deny it, but to understand it. He had to learn that this need was not his enemy. It was the part of him that had been abandoned too soon, and that it deserved to be received, not with judgment, but with compassion. Thomas began a work that had no witnesses. It was not work to be shown. It was work for himself. He sat each night to write, not to publish, not to explain himself, not to justify himself. He wrote to listen to himself, and in those pages he began to encounter figures he had ignored for decades. A child who asked to be held, an adolescent who wanted to be seen, a man who did not dare to ask for what he needed because he had learned that asking was a bother. He was meeting his shadow piece by piece. And each piece he integrated, each fragment of himself he stopped projecting onto others, was a piece of himself that returned home. One day, after months of this work, Thomas said something to me I will never forget. He said, "Dr. Jung, yesterday I looked at my wife, and for the first time I did not need anything from her. I did not need her to look at me in a certain way. I did not need her to tell me she loved me. I did not need her to be my salvation. I simply saw her, and I realized I had never seen her before. I was always seeking something from her that she could not give me. And now I can be with her. Simply be." That is the fruit of shadow integration. It is not that Thomas stopped having desires. It is not that his life became perfect. It is that he stopped needing others to be what he himself could not be. He stopped seeking outside what he could only find within. And by ceasing to seek, he found something he had never had, the peace of being whole. Perhaps you wonder what any of this has to do with you. Perhaps you have not been unfaithful. Perhaps your shadow manifests differently in work addiction, in obsession with success, in fear of solitude, in the inability to say no, in rage that explodes without reason, in sadness that has no name. Because the shadow, dear friend, does not choose a single disguise. It clothes itself in the skin of our symptoms. The shadow is what we deny, and what we deny does not disappear. It becomes our fate. That is why you repeat patterns without understanding them. That is why you feel trapped in relationships that destroy you. That is why success tastes like nothing, because there is a part of you that you left behind in some dark basement, waiting for the day you would descend to retrieve it. And this descent, I warn you, is not comfortable. Confronting the shadow hurts. It hurts to recognize you are not who you thought you were. It hurts to accept that you carry within you the violence you condemn, the selfishness you despise, the weakness you hide. But that pain, believe me, is the pain of being born. It is the pain of becoming whole. I myself, Carl Jung, walked that path. When I broke with Freud, when I found myself without friends, without colleagues, without the support of the academic world, I descended into a hell that no one saw. For years I faced figures that emerged from my dreams, voices that spoke from the depths, images that terrified me. I could have fled. I could have returned to the world of certainties, of safe theories, of easy applause. But I did not, because I knew that what awaited me in the darkness was my own soul. And the same awaits you. I do not ask you to become perfect. I ask you to become whole. to stop projecting onto others what pains you to see in yourself, to stop seeking in the world what you can only find in your own depths, to have the courage to sit in the basement of your psyche with a flickering candle and ask, who is here? What part of myself have I abandoned? What shadow have I been projecting for so long? Because when you answer those questions, when you integrate that shadow, something will change. You will no longer need others to look at you to know you exist. You will no longer need to be desired to feel alive. You will no longer need to be saved to keep from drowning. You will be whole. And from that wholeness, at last, you will be able to meet the other not as one who receives, but as one who shares. Not as one who needs, but as one who chooses. Not as one who flees from himself, but as one who has finally found himself. That is what I have devoted my life to teaching. That is what the Tower of Bollingen represents to me. The place where one can descend into the darkness, knowing that darkness is not the enemy. It is the raw material from which the soul is made. Dear friend, if this letter has resonated within you, if you have felt that there is a shadow within you waiting to be integrated, if you have recognized in Thomas the seeking that also dwells in your heart, then I invite you to stay. This channel, Letters from Bollingen, is a space where I share these letters from the tower, each week a story, each story an invitation to descend, to look, to integrate. Subscribe if you wish to receive these letters in your soul. Like this video if you believe someone else needs to hear that darkness is not the end, but the beginning. And ring the notification bell so you do not miss any of the letters that, from this corner of the world by the shores of Lake Zurich, I write for you. You are not alone on this path. The shadow is not your enemy. It is the part of you that has been waiting since forever for you to welcome it home. Subscribe, like, ring the bell, and allow your soul to receive the next letter from the tower with the light of the lake and the shadow that also dwells within me. Carl Gustav Jung.